along with the changes in shifting climate zones as the planet gets warmer. And I always give this example of this one insect, the monarch butterfly. I got on this because I don't like to frighten my grandchildren about climate change, but I do like to introduce them to nature. And the monarch is a good example. And the monarch is threatened mainly by the fact that the herbicides, Roundup in particular, which kills weeds, is used by farmers extensively, and it's killing all the milkweeds, which is the only thing that the caterpillars can eat. So we would plant milkweeds to try to help the monarch survive. And this one summer, there was just this one broken-winged female. It's the only one. When my wife and I were younger, we could see a dozen monarchs at the same time. Now you don't see any, or you may see one. But this one female produced about 30 caterpillars, and that was a male, and that was a female. And we wondered how many of these would make it to Mexico. You know, the monarch has this migration circuit from a small mountainous area in Mexico all the way to Canada, and then it comes back and hibernates in the winter on these fir trees in Mexico. Well, a Mexican scientist sent me a photo of the fir tree that winter with the monarchs on it, and that was his grandson. And when they looked up at the tree, they saw not only monarchs, but the trees are stressed because of this shifting of climate zones. They're having more frequent droughts, and the fir trees are not doing so well. Well, anyway, the monarch is now being considered as a endangered species. Is down to less than 5%, as many as there were a few decades ago. But that's just an insect. There are many other species. Coral reefs are the rainforest of the ocean. There's more than 1 million species associated with coral reefs. And they are threatened partly by the warming of the ocean, but also by the acidification of the ocean. As we put more CO2 in the atmosphere, the ocean takes it up and becomes more acid. And so those species that have a carbonate skeleton are threatened. As the ocean becomes too acid, it dissolves carbonates. And we're losing more than 1% a year of the coral reef, so there's a big threat in ocean life as well as on land. Okay, now let me mention something about the other thing that's irreversible, and that's sea level rise. If ice sheets go unstable so that we get sea level rise of several meters, that would be is potentially the biggest disaster that could happen from climate change, because more than half of the world's large cities are on coastlines. And all these cities would become dysfunctional. If you had sea level rise of 5 or 6 meters, 20 feet or more, that would put large parts of the cities underwater, and maybe some parts of it still sticking out of the water, but it's going to be completely dysfunctional. The economic implications would be incredible. So Greenland is melting both from the top and from the bottom. The biggest threat is actually the fact that the ocean is getting warmer. So the tons of ice that come out from Greenland and Antarctica into the ocean are melting. Those are called ice shelves. And as the ice shelves melt, that allows the ice sheets to discharge icebergs to the ocean much more rapidly. But, so here's an example of an ice stream on Greenland. These ice cliffs are not, they're not rock, they're ice. And glaciologists had thought, well, it'll take a long time for these ice shelves to melt. And they were calibrating their models based on how ice sheets responded in the Earth's history. But the ice sheets changed during the Earth's history because the climate changed on time scales of tens and hundreds of thousands of years, because that's the time scale for changes of the Earth's orbit, which is the primary drive for these long natural climate changes. But here, we're changing the atmospheric composition in 1 century. And then initially their models said, well, they got 2 meters of sea level rise, 6 or 7 feet. But then they changed a couple of parameters in their ice sheet models and it became 17 meters. So you have to actually look at the Earth's history, I think, to try to understand how sensitive the ice sheets are. And what we know is that the last time that the Earth was warmer than today was the so-called Eemian period, 120,000 years ago. At that time, it was about 1 degree Celsius, less than 2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it is now, and sea level was 6 or 7 meters higher than it is now. It's about 20 feet. So it tells us we really don't want climate to get much warmer than it is now, or the regions that are threatened include much of the east coast of the United States, the entire nation of Bangladesh, and the lowlands in Europe, and a significant fraction of China, where 300 to 400 million people live within 25 meters of height, sea level height. And so we, in a paper that is presently being reviewed, and it includes some of the best relevant scientists in the world as co-authors, because ice sheet models are not yet developed to the point where we can use them to predict how fast the ice sheets will respond. We just look at the data and say, well, ice sheet disintegration is going to be a nonlinear process. It's going to be better characterized by a doubling time for the rate of ice mass loss. And when we look at how Greenland and Antarctica are beginning to lose mass, we can now measure that very precisely. We have a gravity satellite which measures the gravitational field of the Earth so precisely that we can see the changes of the mass of the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet. And what we see is that they're losing mass faster and faster at a doubling rate of about 10 years. That's true on both Greenland and West Antarctica, now a small piece of East Antarctica. What we found in our model is that fresh water that comes out from Greenland and Antarctica has an interesting effect on the ocean, because the fresh water is, of course, lighter than the salty ocean water. And what it does is cut down or slow down the formation of deep water around the coast of Antarctica and also in the North Atlantic. And we see this beginning to happen. We can measure that the amount of deep water. Normally, what happens in the winter around the coast of Antarctica, the salty ocean water gets extremely cold in the winter and then will sink all the way to the bottom of the ocean. But as you add fresh water to that, then it's not denser than the water below, and so it doesn't sink. And so what happens then is it actually starts, instead of the world getting warmer everywhere, we find that around Antarctica and in the North Atlantic Ocean, it actually doesn't get warmer. It actually gets cooler because of this fresh, cold water and its effect on the ocean circulation. We actually can observe that beginning to happen in both places. So, it's the situation is that we're close to handing young people a situation where this could be out of their control if we don't stabilize the atmospheric composition and stabilize climate. And we know that the planet is now out of energy balance. There's more energy coming in than there is energy being radiated to space. And that's, of course, the expected effect of adding CO2 to the atmosphere, because it reduces the radiation to space. And so the planet has to warm up in order to restore. It's got more energy coming in than going out, so it's going to get warmer until it begins to radiate as much energy as it's getting from the sun. So we need to stabilize the atmospheric composition and actually begin to decrease somewhat the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. What that means is we have to phase out fossil fuels. It's very well understood. This is not debatable in the scientific community. We can't burn all the fossil fuels. If we burn all the fossil fuels, we would send the planet back to the ice-free state, which would mean sea level would go up 70 meters, which is 250 feet, something. So we can't do that. We have to leave a large fraction of the remaining fossil fuels in the ground, unless we capture the CO2 and then bury it again, but that's not practical. So the thing is, we need to make the price of fossil fuels honest. As long as fossil fuels appear to be the cheapest energy, then we're going to keep burning them. They're cheapest only because they're subsidized to a large degree, but also they don't have to pay their cost to society. The air pollution and water pollution, if your child gets asthma from air pollution, you have to pay the bill, not the fossil fuel company. And likewise, the climate impacts. The public bears the cost. So we should be adding a fee which would collect from the fossil fuel company at the source, the domestic mine or the port of entry. And then if you gave that money, equal amount to every legal resident of the country, it would be a huge incentive. The person who does better than average in limiting their fossil fuel use would make money. And it would be a big incentive for them to pay attention to their carbon footprint. And it'd be an incentive for entrepreneurs to develop no carbon and low carbon energy sources. And it actually stimulates the economy. And this is the only viable international solution, because if, say, China and the United States would say, okay, we're going to have a rising carbon fee, they would also say, those countries that don't have a carbon fee, we're going to put a border duty on the products from those countries. And we will also rebate to our manufacturers who export to those countries the carbon fee, so that our domestic manufacturers are not disadvantaged in the international trading. So it's very simple. Now, you will hear that now China is now the biggest source of the climate change. They passed the United States as the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide. But it's not today's emissions that cause the climate change. It's the cumulative emissions, because it stays in the system for millennia. So if you look at the cause of climate change, the cumulative emissions, the United States is responsible for more than a quarter. Europe is responsible for more than a quarter. China for 10%, and India for 3%, and so on. So on a per capita basis, the biggest contributor is actually the United Kingdom, and the United States second, and Germany third. China is only about 1/10 of what we are. And India almost disappears on this chart. But the emissions in the future are coming particularly from China, partly because they're making products for us. And it's mainly coal use by China. And it's the same story in India. rapidly increasing emissions, mostly coal use. Electricity is generated by coal-fired power plants. Now, I'm not criticizing Ernie Moniz, who's a very good scientist and Secretary of Energy, and he's worked very hard recently in trying to support the president in the negotiations with Iran. But when here in a press conference with Podesta, who was Obama's energy climate czar while he was still working in the White House, they say, oh, they're very optimistic about Paris, the upcoming negotiations, and partly because we've agreed with China we're going to work on carbon capture and storage. And so that's a reason for optimism. This is pure, unadulterated bullshit. There is no chance that India and China are going to capture the CO2 and bury it. Why would they do that? It's very difficult and expensive. And who wants the CO2 buried under them anyway? It's dangerous if it comes out. So it's not going to happen. Yeah. So just recently, I gave a talk in Oslo, and Christiana Figueres, the executive director of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, was the other keynote speaker. And I made my comment about the fact that governments are not actually proposing any solution, and they're planning to go to Paris and clap each other on the back and say, oh, this is great, we've made this agreement, we're all going to try to do better, we're all going to have goals for reducing emissions 10% or 20% or 30%. Meanwhile, total global emissions will continue to go up. As long as fossil fuels are allowed to be the cheapest energy, the emissions are just going to continue. But they can't, or we're screwing our children. And they're pretending that they don't understand this. And so here, what does Christiana say? So anyway, in Oslo, when I said that, she was furious. But at the end of the day, after we had a conversation in front of the audience, she had calmed down somewhat and told me I should keep saying what I'm saying, because she knows darn well that that's true. That there is no plan for Paris to actually succeed in doing what is necessary, and that's to get fossil fuel emissions to decline rapidly. And if we don't do that, we're screwing our children. And so what does she say? So what I have said is, well, all we need is the United States and China to say, okay, we're going to have a carbon fee. And frankly, China is beginning to understand this, and China does not deny the reality of climate change. But she says, oh, it's not going to happen. It's too complicated. This is really too complicated. The carbon fee is too complicated. Because what she's talking about, you've got Angela Merkel of Germany running around the world, telling everybody, oh, do what we're doing. We got a cap and trade with offset scheme, which is doing practically nothing. I mean, Europe has had this cap and trade with offsets for the last few decades, and it's done practically nothing. And it's a very complicated thing, which you bring big banks into the story for no reason whatever. They don't add anything. All they do is make a lot of money in trading, and every dime comes out of the public's pocket. What you actually want is a simple, honest scheme in which you have a steady increase in the price of carbon emissions, not some fluctuating market in which you have ways to buy your way out. It'd be very simple. But it does not seem that there's any intention of actually solving the problem. Yeah, I call this cap and trade with offsets, half-assed and half-baked. It's half-assed because there's no way to make it global. You have to go to each country individually and beg them to be part of it. The same way with Kyoto Protocol. And there's no way to enforce it. What if they don't, they say, okay, I'm going to try to reduce my emissions 40% by the middle of the century. What if they don't? Nothing you can do about it. It doesn't make sense. And most of our energy is coming from fossil fuels, and as I mentioned, it's continuing to go up. So we need, the solution is simple. That's what this organization, Citizens Climate Lobby, has understood, that what we have to do is have a carbon fee, which would rise over time. So, for example, there has been an economic study of what if you had a $10 a ton carbon fee, and it went up $10 a ton each year. That at the end of 10 years, it's $100 a ton, which is a lot. It's with the present energy fossil fuel use in the United States, that's $600 billion a year, which means $2,000 for every legal resident. It would increase the price of gasoline $1 a gallon, but you would get $2,000. And you would have a big incentive to pay attention to, next time you buy a car, you'll probably buy one that's more fuel efficient. And more than 60% of the people would be getting more money in the dividend than they pay in increased prices. But a person who's wealthy and has big houses and flies around the world would pay more in increased prices, but they can afford that. And so unless you make and the thing is that this approach is one that conservatives could support, because it is a conservative approach. It lets the market make the decisions, and it does not give one dime to the government to make the government bigger. So, the problem is, so I've talked with politicians on both sides of the aisle. Barbara Boxer decided, well, this is really a good idea. So she introduced a bill in the Senate that said, let's have a rising carbon fee. Only problem was she would only give 60% of the money to the people. The other 40% would go to the government, which means that instead of 65% of the people making money, it would be less than half. So people wouldn't like this. You're making it a tax, and there's no way that Republicans would agree with this, because you're using this as a means to make the government bigger. So who's going to support this? The only people who will support this are the public. That's why we've got to get the public to understand that, first of all, that climate really is a threat to young people and future generations, but also that you could solve the problem easily, and it's actually beneficial. At present, we're leaving our children a future which, unlike us old people who could always look to do better than what our parents did economically, that's no longer true. But and it's partly because the way that governments have not done a very good job of making letting the economy, we still have the potential to be the most innovative country in the world. We've got great universities, but we've got to actually move to the future, and that means beyond fossil fuels. It's just not coming from either party. So, but it's probably because they're not educated. So Citizens Climate Lobby is doing a great job in terms of meeting with Congress people and getting them to understand this story, and continuing to, you know, politely talk with Congress people, and to write letters to the editor, and I think it's our best chance. We're finally beginning to get enough people. You know, it's hard to communicate in the real world because we've got to compete with fossil fuel money. And if you look at the advertisements you see every day on television of how, oh look, the United States is now becoming energy independent. And because our fossil fuel industry has invented fracking, a way to get more gas and more oil out of the ground, that's great, except we can't do it without screwing our children. And there's no need. This is the fact that oil is cheap now is actually the time that we can get this to work, because now we could. You could add a fee and still have people accept the price of gasoline at the pump. And if they're getting this monthly dividend, they will actually, most people will actually say, let it rise, and they'll see that it actually, you know, there's been an economic study by Regional Economic Modeling Incorporated that showed that this rate of rising fee would actually spur the economy, increase the GNP, create more than 3 million jobs. And so you know, we just have to get somebody to try it. Either a state or preferably the federal government. There are now Congress people actually on both sides of the aisle who think this makes sense. And if we could just get more of the public putting pressure on them, I think we can get it to happen, and the U.S. could be in a position of being a technological leader if it gets this kind of economic incentive behind pushing technologies. Okay, I think I've used my time.